Hi, this is Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz from Israel365 News. I'm here with my very dear friend, Pastor Trey Graham, and we're going to be talking about the upcoming Israeli election. And I can hear the people saying, oh, another one. And it's right. This is the fifth election in 4 years, which is, it's more than excessive. But I really feel that this one is actually very different than the previous ones. I really feel that this one, there's been some things shaking loose that will make this one more significant. But first of all, I mean, even as an American who moved to Israel, the voting system is so much different and so confusing. It's not a two-party system. And also, to be honest, you don't vote for the person. So to translate it, I'm used to living in the craziness. To translate it, I'd like to have my friend Pastor Trey explain to us how Israelis vote.
We do need to help our audience understand Israeli elections as we think about who our audience for this show is. You have Israelis who understand the process. You've got Israelis who don't understand the process. And then you've got a bunch of non-Israelis who don't understand the process. I think we're going to be talking to mainly the non-Israelis in this interview. So let's discuss how the process works. First of all, as you said, this is not a two-party election. This is a parliamentary election. So for Americans who are watching, they go vote, and there's minor parties in American elections, but they don't sway the vote very much. So you go vote for an R or a D if you're in an American election. Here, there are not two parties. There are actually 39 parties that are in this election.
We're up to 39 already? Oh, my goodness.
39 parties in this election. There's 11 who are possible or likely to pass the electoral threshold, which I'll talk about in a second. So that means 28 of them will likely not be in the government, but there are 39 different parties running in this election. And when an Israeli voter, and there are 6.8 million eligible Israeli voters, when they go to their polling place, they are going to vote by paper ballot. This is not touchscreen. This is not electronic. In the startup nation, the high-tech Israel, it is still a paper ballot election, and you go into a voting booth.
That took some real getting used to. In America, it's actually a little intimidating. You go in and there's a machine and you have to know how to use it. In Israel, you go in, you go behind a curtain, there's a big tray with a whole bunch of little paper notes, and it has a Hebrew letter on it and the name of the thing. You pick it up, you put it in your envelope, you come out from behind the screen, you stuff the envelope into a box, and that's it. And then they have to count them all up. But that's as simple as it can be, and that's what.
There are 11,707 different polling places around the country for these 6.8 million voters. As you say, you go into the polling place, you get a piece of paper. It's about the size of a business card. You put it in an envelope, you stick it in a cardboard box, and you walk out. That's the high-tech version of this election. But what that means is, because Israelis are assigned a voting location, you have to go to where you're assigned. It's pretty easy to track. And if somebody votes at a location not their assigned space, then when their vote is found and their name is on it, they'll be double checked to make sure they did not also vote at their primary polling space, so that you can avoid double counting this way. And this is the fifth election in 43 months in the last less than 4 years.
We do get a day off to vote. And not only do we get a day off,
it's a national holiday. So
we get free transport. We can get on the bus and they'll take us there for free.
This election is going to cost the state of Israel an estimated 538 million shekels. That's $154 million. And when you add up all 5 elections in the last 43 months, that's a total cost to the country of 2.2 billion shekels, $630 million to have 5 elections in 43 months. And the reason you keep having these elections is because the goal is to create a majority, a ruling majority. But as we said, this is not a two-party system, it's a multi-party system. So to be in the majority, you've got to have at least 61 seats in the 120-seat Knesset. Well, no party in the history of the modern state of Israel, which is about to turn 75 years old, no single party has ever gotten to 61. So you got to get your 30 or 35 or 40 if you're the biggest party, plus somebody else's 20, plus somebody else's 10, somebody else's 5. You've got to form a governing coalition or a block of at least 61 seats. And the reason there are these repeated elections is nobody's been able to get to that magic number of 61. And thus, the Israelis are going to do this again on November 1st. And it's possible, though troubling to say, this one may not work either. And you may be going back to a sixth election in May of next year.
You but think so? It wouldn't surprise me. It really wouldn't surprise me.
When you talk about getting to that magic number of 61, again, the biggest party in the polls is, of course, the Likud party led by Benjamin Netanyahu. We're going to get into him and his possible bloc or coalition in a minute. But his party's polling at like 31 or 32 seats. Well, to get to 61, you obviously need 30 more. Yesh Atid, which is the party of the current prime minister, Yair Lapid, is polling at like 24, but they're not going to work together. So you got to go to these smaller parties, Religious Zionists at 13, National Unity at 12, the ultra-Orthodox parties, Shas and United Torah Judaism at like 8 and 7 each. So it's going to be very hard for anybody to put together the 61-seat majority. And the last thing we have to do in this sort of 101 lesson, we told you there's 39 parties running in this election. To get into the government, you have to pass what's called the threshold, which is 3.25%, which works out to about 4 seats. So if you're a party who gets 3% of the national vote, your party doesn't get in and your votes go away. You've got to pass the threshold. And there are some major parties who are right at that threshold number. The two Arab parties, Hadash-Tal and then Ram, who's in the current coalition with Lapid, they're polling right at 4 seats. Labor and Meretz, the left-wing parties, are polling at 5 seats. So they're probably going to pass the threshold. Jewish Home, led by Ayelet Shaked, probably not going to pass the threshold. So that's why that there's the guess that maybe 11 will make it, 28 will not, because you have to pass a minimum number of votes. And that is about 140 or 150,000 votes you have to get as a party to cross the threshold to get into the government. And if your party gets only 100,000 votes, your party doesn't make it into the Knesset, those 100,000 votes go away, and the party doesn't make it in. And I'll close this by saying everything that we've just described is actually only phase 1 of the long process, because once the vote is counted and we know which parties made it in, then that whole coalition forming process starts, which is a whole nother ball game, which we should do another interview another day about that. Right now, the question is, whose party will cross the threshold? And that's currently Yesh Atid, Lapid's party, is polling at the second place. Likud, Netanyahu's party, is polling at the biggest, 31 or 32. And now we get into personality conversation.
Right. First of all, I want to we're not going to get into it, but that forming the coalition, I think, is a characteristically Jewish process. It's the only time when the president he basically says, okay, I think this guy has the best chance, and that's when the bargaining begins. And it's like, no, I'll give you this, you give me that. It's open market day. It's crazy. So you said that Netanyahu has the best chance, which is true. But Netanyahu has the best chance only, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, if he forms a right-wing coalition. As an Israeli, most Israelis know that Netanyahu is not right-wing. He gives off the impression of being right-wing, and most Americans will think he's right-wing. He is actually, strangely enough, like Trump. Trump is not a Republican. He started out as a Democrat. Netanyahu is not right-wing. Netanyahu is Netanyahu, and he's an opportunist. So he can sit with the right wing. He can sit with the left wing. He's advanced right-wing policies, but not as much as the right wing would like, and he's advanced left-wing policies. But this election has really left him. It's left him in the position where he's going to have to probably, the only way he can form a coalition is to form with the right wing. Part of the reason is that Naftali Bennett formed a unity government and actually sat with Yair Lapid, who is left wing, very left wing, and he sat with Mansour Abbas in the coalition, who's an Arab, and it was the first time an Arab was ever part of the coalition. The right-wing voters got very jaded, and they said, we're going to go right-wing, we're going to go really right-wing. So there's been a lot of press about a gentleman named Itamar Ben-Gvir. Itamar Ben-Gvir, he's very controversial. And he's actually really probably going to be the kingmaker when it comes to this coalition. And I think it's important to know who he is. He's formed an alliance with the religious Zionists, and the religious Zionists, they're looking at probably around 14 seats. They're the third largest party, right behind Netanyahu and Yair Lapid. And Ben-Gvir, there's a lot of talk that he's a racist, that he's extremist, and I actually sat down and interviewed him. And the thing is, he was so right-wing and such an extremist that he wasn't even considered a major player in politics until this election. And now, because the Israeli electorate, I think, has shifted right, because of Naftali Bennett and because Yair Lapid is really very, very left-wing, Ben-Gvir has risen to the top. Yair Lapid, when he stood in front of the UN and said that he supported a two-state solution, when he spoke to the Arab media and said that there would be no Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount, he lost so many votes, and he pushed a lot of people further right-wing. And that's why Yair Lapid, for the first time, is really actually a big player in the coalition. But he's considered so extremist. There were two Democratic lawmakers who warned Netanyahu that if he brings Ben-Gvir into the government, that could endanger relations between America and Israel. And the United Arab Emirates said the same thing to Netanyahu, that if Ben-Gvir is in the government, that would really be a problem for them. So who is he? He is a follower of, from a very young age, of Meir Kahane, of blessed memory, who started a political party called Kaf. And Kaf was indeed very strongly right-wing. You might even say unapologetically so. So Ben-Gvir, he has been quoted as saying that he thinks Arabs should be kicked out of Israel. And he softened that and he said that anyone who opposes the state of Israel should get kicked out of Israel. He's also called for the death penalty for terrorists, which 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, was considered very controversial. And I think these days, because of the viciousness of the terrorism, that's not so extremist anymore. He's mellowed, but I think also the electorate has gone further to the right. He's also religious. He lives in Hebron, which is considered militant and which is also considered religious. He believes in a Jewish state, and he, unlike Lapid, wants Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount. He's become very savvy, and he said, equal rights. It's a civil rights issue. So he's gone very savvy that way. So, in my opinion is that calling him a racist, there may be something to that. He was at one point very clearly extremist and racist. I'm not so sure anymore. And he is certainly a big player. He's, like I said, 14 seats. He could solve a lot of problems for Netanyahu by joining up with him, but he will not sit with Arabs. He will not sit with the left wing. So he causes a lot of problems. And also the problems with the foreign relations, people who think that he's extremist. So, but I trust Netanyahu to play this very delicate balancing game. I think in the end he's going to find a way to do that. What's your? I'd be really interested to hear your opinion of Ben Gvir. I mean, he lived in Hebron. I lived up the block from him. I lived in Gush Etzion. I lived up the street from him. He was just one of the guys. What's your impression of him?
Well, there's a lot to unpack in what you said. You mentioned that Netanyahu, in your estimation, is not right-wing. I will tell the audience that he presents himself, of course, as right-wing, and he leads a party, Likud, that presents themselves as right-wing, and very proudly states that he is opposed to the left, and he's opposed to liberal or left ideology in Israeli terminology. And so while you can very accurately describe Netanyahu as transactional, and that's how you equated him with Trump in that way, Netanyahu presents himself as right-wing, and to form a government, he has to have other right-wing parties or religious parties or both join his coalition. It also needs to be said that probably 70% of the country, Jewish Israelis, would call themselves on the right, and probably 70% of the Knesset would call itself right-wing. And so the question is, why is it so hard to form a majority coalition of just above 50% if like 70 or 80% of the Knesset members are right-wing? And the answer is
an amazing question. If you can answer that for me.
Well, I think we can answer it. The answer is because they don't want to work with Netanyahu. It is a referendum on pro-Bibi or anti-Bibi. You know as well as I do that a lot of these now newer, smaller right-wing parties are led by former Likud party members, Naftali Bennett being the prime example of that led the Yamina party, who was the prime minister for 18 months, but he's not even running in this election again. He was a former Netanyahu aide in Likud. Yisro B'Teinu is led by a former Likud party member and Netanyahu aide. And these people have lost faith or lost trust or both in Netanyahu, so they don't want to run with him anymore. And so they leave the party, they form their own party, and then they decide whether it's to their political advantage to align with him in a coalition or not. So to your basic point, Netanyahu presents himself publicly as right-wing, and he's good at presenting in that way, and that's why most of the American audience thinks of him that way. To bolster that, you have to add in parties that are even more right-wing than Likud is. And you've mentioned the religious Zionist party. Itamar Ben-Gvir that you're talking about is actually number 2 on that list. Bezalel Smotrich is number 1 on that list. And to say, why are these what you might call very far right, and that's how the media presents them, very far right parties in the conversation, it's a natural reaction to the increase in terrorism, increase in Arab and Palestinian terrorism. The natural reaction to that is we need somebody who will stop that, who will protect innocent lives, who will protect people from being terrorist victims. And so the person that one guy calls a racist, meaning anti-Arab, the other guy says will protect us from Arab violence. And
I
that's
also want to add. I think you
the
are
selling point.
you are so on the money. You've absolutely broken this down correctly. I don't think I could have. It's these are some very thin points. But when we talk about right wing in Israel, it's not exactly the same as right wing in America. Right wing in Israel, until Gush Katif, until the expulsion from Gush Katif,
Gaza.
right wing and left wing was all about the land for peace process.
Right.
And you're saying something very interesting, which I think is correct, but it's very, very poignant, which is now we're talking about security. Back then, we didn't even talk about security. Right and left was not about security or how to approach security. It was about land for peace or not land for peace. And one of the things that we're seeing now, that and you're presenting it correctly, is there is no land for peace movement in Israel anymore. It is gone. People don't believe in it. You have a few rockets drop on your house, and you stop believing in it. And last May, not only was it rockets, but perhaps even more shocking and traumatizing was the violence in the mixed cities. We've been, okay, Gaza's Gaza. We've got Hamas, but this is Yaffo. This is where I go to buy my fish. This is East Jerusalem. Okay, not so nice, but I'd go buy my soda there when I went to the Western Wall. And now all of a sudden, no, they're the enemy. So the shift, the topics have changed from peace versus no peace to terrorism versus is very much appeasement, and Ben-Gvir is like, no more appeasement. We're going to end it right now. No more games. So that's an interesting shift in what we're focusing on. I just want to. So you were saying, yes, okay, the right wing.
Well, you make a good point. What is the
Netanyahu.
definition of right and left? In America, right and left is often on social policies, like traditional marriage and abortion. These are social policies. That's usually the delineator in right and left in America, in the political world, not so much in Israel. As you say, it's shall we negotiate with the peace process with the Palestinians or not? But now it is protect us from terrorism, protect us from violence. And if somebody presents themselves and their party as the will stop them, will kick them out. You even mentioned death penalty for terrorists. And that is attractive, especially to ones who are victims themselves of terrorism. If someone took the life of my family member in a terrorist act, you can understand why they would want the ultimate punishment given to the perpetrator of the terrorism. And again, it depends on how you look at this party. You look at them as racist, I hate Arabs, or you look at them as they will protect us from Arab violence. That's the people who are supporting or rejecting this religious Zionist party.
Another thing that Ben-Gvir represents is, and it's very much connected to what you just described, is Jewish pride. He's almost like the Jewish pride movement, meaning I'm a Jew. I'm a proud Jew living in Israel, and that means a lot of things. And one of the things it means is killing a Jew is a horrible thing. We're people too. And it's kind of deeply disturbing when you start unpacking the issues that are on the left, especially the left wing from outside of Israel. It's racist. It's classically racist. It's pre-World War II racist, where Jews cannot live here, Jews cannot even go there, and violence against the Jews is kind of second-rate violence and does not warrant a response or a strong response. Rockets on Jewish cities, it should not justify a strong military response. Rockets on cities, stabbings. There's a lot of anger about the IDF going into Shem, Nablus, and Jenin. they're going up against automatic weapons, and lots of them. And no one's asking where they came from. And you take someone like Itamar Ben-Gvir, it's very much, I mean, it's extremist to have a Jewish pride movement, to say we're proud of being Jewish and we're not going to be second-rated and we're not going to allow ourselves to be killed anymore. So there's a little bit of that, a big dose of that mixed in as well, that Israel is a Jewish state. And I spoke with Simcha Rothman yesterday, and he spoke. What he did recently was Rav Yehuda Glick was going outside the Temple Mount on the east side and blowing shofar. And Simcha Rothman, who is in the National Religious Party as well, he's number 4 on the list. He went, and he's a member of the Knesset now. He went because he said, this is why we have the Jewish state, so we can blow the shofar in public. And the police were arresting people for blowing shofar outside of the Temple Mount, just in Jerusalem. And he said that's not acceptable. And actually the courts upheld that and fined the police and said, no, you can't arrest people for blowing shofar in Jerusalem. So there's a strong dose of Jewish pride in this right-wing movement, which fascinates me. Would you agree with that, Pastor Trey?
I do think, again, how you present yourself. We talked about Bibi Netanyahu may not have acted or governed right-wing, but presents himself as right-wing. That's the same thing. This party is promoting itself under the theme of we are Jews, it is our rightful homeland, biblically and historically our rightful homeland. We should be safe here, we should be at home here, and that is all true. And as a Bible-believing Christian supporter of Israel, of course I believe it's a Jewish state and should be a safe place for Jews. But when we're talking politics, I mentioned those 6.8 million eligible voters. Remember, 1 million of those are Arab Israeli citizens. So
Sure.
They have the right to vote. They are full citizens of the country. And so they are asking, what will a new coalition, if this party with Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, if they're in the ruling government, what will that mean for the million plus Arab Israeli citizens? Because everybody looks at it from where they sit. So Ben-Gvir and Smotrich look at it from their side. There's Palestinian terrorism. There's Arab terrorism. We should stop it and protect Jews. 100% yes. But if you're an Israeli Arab citizen, you're saying, what are they going to do to me? All the way to, are they going to try to kick me out of my own country? Because as you said, it is a Jewish state. But the tension for 75 years has been, it's a Jewish democratic state. So when we're talking elections and politics, those 1 million Arab voters, they want to have their voice heard also.
So, Pastor Trey, you raised an interesting point. You said everyone looks at it from where they are, from where they're standing. As a Christian who lives in America and loves Israel, what's important to you, and who do you think represents it?
Well, I told you this is the 5th election in 43 months. I was there for the first 3 election days in this cycle. Okay. I'm not allowed to vote because I'm not a citizen, but I'm in Israel a lot, and I was there 3 consecutive election days, not able to vote. So I still can't vote. And nobody's asked me for my endorsement either, by the way. So I speak from the outsider and observer perspective. The majority of the country, as I've already said, would be considered right-wing on the security and terrorism issue. I think that is of huge importance, of course, because lives should be protected. Terrorists should be stopped. Terrorists should be punished. Also, as an observer who cares about the functioning of your country, I want a government for you that will work. And 5 elections in 43 months doesn't work. And The possibility of a sixth election next May, because nobody can form a coalition, is a stalemate system that's just not working. Now, how do you get past that? A lot of people will say Benjamin Netanyahu should have ridden off into the sunset, and he's already served the most years of anybody. He's the longest serving prime minister in the history of the country, having passed Ben Gurion. If he would ride off into the sunset, these people say, then that 70 or 80% of the country that's right wing could unite around the right wing policies and not have to depend on people accused of being racist. And you could have a right wing, pro-Jewish, pro-democracy government that would actually function, because it's not an anti-personality situation like you have right now.
I didn't think about that, and I think you're actually right. Because it's either left wing or Netanyahu plus the extreme right, that's what we get. Whereas if we see Netanyahu, he's not very good at bringing up people under him. He's not very good.
He's turned them away. That's why. Supports them. That's why they go start other parties.
Right, exactly. I've spoken to people who I interviewed Moshe Feiglin, and one of the elections, I forget which one it was. Feiglin got a lot of votes in the Likud party, and then Netanyahu kicked him out because he was a threat. Netanyahu is not very good at he's
Naftali Bennett would say the same thing.
Yes. Lieberman, I think that's why he left.
Yes.
Lieberman was an ally, and then he left. So Netanyahu is not good at bringing up number twos, but I think you're right, especially since we have a coalition government. The beautiful thing about a coalition government is it doesn't have to be polarized. You can have a coming together of different thoughts that actually are very representative of the demographics and would represent the country as well as function. And Netanyahu, as good as he is, and I think he's done an amazing job, God bless him, we should double his pension, but he should start the pension very soon. And also a lot of the opposition to him. I spoke to Gil Hoffman last week, he's been in the Knesset, covering the Knesset with JPOS, I think 25 years. I asked him, why all the opposition to Netanyahu? And he said, he's just been around too long. It's not that he's done anything horrible. To be honest, I think all the accusations of corruption are either baseless or really spurious. They don't have much basis at all. He's just been around too long. And, if he does something you don't like, you remember that. So, I remember that he voted for Gush Katif, for expelling the Jews from Gush Katif. I remember all the things that he did that weren't so great. He's great. He's an amazing economist, but a little bit favors the rich too much, which we have the people who aren't so rich have been stung a bit. So, yeah, I see what you mean. If we didn't have to focus on for a right-wing government that wasn't extremist, and that would be a good thing, and it would be representative of the country. I hear that. That's a very good point. Wow.
There's two more things
maybe
that we could have said.
If you take a step back from this.
Let me say two things that we should have said in the introduction. And that is, there's no term limits. So there's no reason Netanyahu can't keep running. And the second thing is, the members of Knesset are not geographically represented, like the congressman from the 3rd District of Texas or the 1st District of Ohio. They are nationally elected, not geographically represented. So the people all over your country who live in different cities, urban, rural, outlier cities, Arab cities, Jewish cities, mixed towns, they can vote for any party they want, but they're not going to get a local representative to come and represent their interests like a U.S. congressman does. So that makes this election always nationalized, not localized. And then you get into these big picture conversations, because it's not about who's going to fix my potholes or who's going to build me a bridge in my town. It's all about national stuff, which in Israel basically always comes back to security.
I wonder. Yeah, it actually probably does. I was going to say no. There's economy as well, but even the economy is security.
And
We have
national.
the yeah, we have the gas deal is like we're basically going to make peace with Lebanon because of a gas deal, a natural gas deal. It's even that the gas deal should be just financial, but it's actually securities.
Israel used to be a much smaller country, and it did affect the politics. So you're right that it wasn't localized, but at one point, even the national politics were fairly local. Everyone knew everyone else. You did army with them. You went shopping there. And I remember the year that they changed over from big Buicks at the Knesset. I was living in Jerusalem, and then they changed over to Cadillacs. And the president's house, you used to be able to walk in. They would have prayers there 3 times a day, and you would go in and walk in and have prayers in the little synagogue next to the president's house. And now the entire block is blocked off at both sides. There are people who live on that block, but you can't go down that street because of security. And it changed, and it's Israel changed, I think, because of that. The Benny Begin, the son of Menachem Begin, he used to make a big deal about going to the Knesset to work by bus, and you would see him on the bus going to work, and they don't do that anymore. And you're right; it's now national politics. It's a very different feel. And I think it actually operates differently because of that. But that's Israel. We're getting bigger, I guess. So, so if you were Israeli, if you were Israeli, who would you vote for?
Well, on my talk show, I try to pin people down all the time, so I don't know that I'm going to let you pin me down. You know me for a long time. I'm on the right side of the politics in America, and I'm on the right side of the politics in Israel. And the natural spot for people is Likud on that side. The question is, what does the Likud look like today? Is it the right wing and focus on security and focus on the economy and help Israel become more and more capitalist? Is that the Likud? That's what Mr. Netanyahu is going to keep presenting Likud as. The Jewish Home Party, which isn't even in this race at this time, Bayit Yehudi, it was called, of course, in Hebrew. I'm a supporter of Israel as the biblical homeland of the Jewish people. As a follower of Jesus, it's the homeland of Jesus. I want it safe and secure because I want my friends and all the people that I love there to be safe and secure. I want it to be capitalist because I believe that's the best way to provide for everyone economically. I want it to be respected on the world stage. I want a leader who doesn't have to constantly fight his own legal troubles. And you said it about the corruption trials that Netanyahu's been facing for years, whether they're valid or not. He is under indictment for corruption. And is that the leader you want for your country? Because you have to ask, is every decision he's going to make part of a legal defense strategy? That's not the way to lead a country. So I want what's best for the land of Israel. Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim. I want peace for the country and peace for Jerusalem. And I want a government that works, because 2.2 billion shekels spending by the nation in the last 43 months is a killer for the economy. And I hope there's a coalition of right-wing, Bible-believing, God-loving people who actually know what they're doing. Because I want Bible-believing politicians in America and in Israel, but I want competent politicians in Israel and America. And if I can go 2 for 2 in that, I'll be a happy voter.
So I don't mind getting the days off. I don't mind. I really don't. It's very interesting that on the social values, the social level, uh, American evangelicals and religious Jewish Israelis have quite a bit in common.
It's called the Bible, my friend.
Yeah, it's almost like don't have to talk about it. There it is,
Right.
on the table. It's very interesting, and I think if anything, though, I don't know. I'm a little spoiled that I don't go to Tel Aviv, but I don't think the Israeli left wing is as entrenched in the insanity that's taking over America. So on the social values, it's not
Bezrat Hashem.
God willing, man. Yeah, it's. I look at it. I grew up there. I can't figure it out. So in Israel, it's like, yeah, either you're religious or you're secular. And yes, there is a lot of LGB in Israel, not so much T. They're not, and there's not, so there's not as much things with the kids. And racism is an interesting issue here, because in Israel, the only racism you have is mostly is Jewish or Arab, and it's actually much more simple than America, because I don't want to say be a racist, but there's a reason not to care so much for the Arabs. There's a reason to say, look, I'd rather they didn't live in my city, though the cities are integrated, and you can't say that.
Well, yes, sir, but I am going to remind you of the 1 million Arab Israeli citizen voters. They're going to be going to the ballot box too, though their turnout is a really big question. We haven't touched on turnout yet.
So so the Arabs, people a lot of times, it's funny when I go online, when I go on Twitter, and people find out I'm Israeli, things turn very unpleasant very quickly, and it's funny sometimes they'll say, "Oh, the Israeli occupation of Gaza," and I'll be like, "No, there's no Israeli occupation of Gaza."
Right.
And then they get to there are no civil rights for the Israeli Arabs. I'm like, there are absolute Israeli civil rights.
Yes.
And they're like, "Oh, but they don't vote." And I'm like, "No, the Palestinian citizens don't vote. Israeli Arabs absolutely vote. They're the third or fourth largest party, third or fourth largest bloc. They represent 20% of the voters, so they're there." You touched on something that I actually don't know so much about, because there's been so much drama in other areas. The Arab turnout. And the Arab turnout, if I'm not mistaken, usually serves the left-wing parties more than the right. Is that correct?
Well, the Arab parties, until this past what they called the Big Tent, or the wide-ranging coalition that Yamina and Naftali Bennett put together, the Arab parties have not sat in the coalition. So they always sit in the opposition. So turnout is not only how many seats will the Arab parties have as members of Knesset representing Arab citizens' interests, but also the bigger their parties are, the smaller the Jewish parties will be, because it's simple math. You got to divide the 120 seats somewhere. So if the Arab combined parties have like 18 seats, or if they have 14 seats, that is a difference. Their agenda is going to be the same whether they have 18 or 14. But if they have 18, that's 4 seats that didn't go to Jewish parties. Now, if they're Jewish right-wing parties, that would be in the Netanyahu bloc. If they're Jewish left-wing parties, that would be in the Lapid bloc. So turnout is going to be a big question. And the prognosticators are saying they expect overall turnout to be in the 65 to 70%. That's historically what turnout is in Israeli elections, about 70%. They're expecting about 50% turnout in the Arab sector. And the parties have already stated they're not going to sit with Netanyahu, and Netanyahu says he's not going to sit with them. So there's a lot of Arab voters who are saying it's not worth going. We're not going to be in the government this time, so our interests will not be represented. So there is less motivation to go vote. So it all depends on every election, because we're talking about the Israeli election on November 1st, but we have an American election on November the 8th, and the same question is turnout. Who's going to come vote? And both countries would be better served if more people would vote, though I need to tell the American audience that the Israeli voter turnout is always better than the American voter turnout. And so you see politicians in Israel go into different cities that they don't normally hang out in. Why? Because they're trying to increase turnout for their party in that city that's not a stronghold of their city, because it's such a small country. It's the equivalent of going to the swing states in America, trying to garner more votes in those areas. You have swing cities in Israel, and you'll have Netanyahu going to visit towns that he normally doesn't hang out in to try to gather up votes there. And so we have to remember that the Arabs have full citizenship if they are Israeli citizens, as you say. That's why it can be a Jewish and democratic country. And we shouldn't let our American audience, if that's the majority of people watching, we shouldn't let them conflate Arab Israeli citizens with Arab Palestinians,
right,
who are not eligible to vote. They may have similar sympathies, but their citizenship is a major distinction, and we shouldn't let the audience of this interview conflate the two.
Right. And actually, the problem is when they say that the Palestinians don't get to vote, it's actually true when you're talking about the Palestinians who are civilians of the Palestinian Authority, because the Palestinian Authority doesn't hold elections. So they're stuck without any voting rights.
They could vote if their own governmental leaders would hold an election. Correct.
Also, when I say that Israel isn't racially divided, that's not exactly accurate. There is a divide between the Ashkenazi and the Sephardi. And when Menachem Begin...
Subsets of Jews, yes.
Right. The Ashkenazi being descended from European Jews, Sephardim being Spanish, Portuguese, and the Arab countries. And the Sephardim tend to be working class. They also tend to be right wing. They're more strongly right wing. So there is that. It's kind of funny in Israel. It's like we almost don't see skin color, but the cultural differences are very much there, and it does affect the politics. And even though Menachem Begin was an Ashkenazi, he was the first prime minister that the Sephardim felt that they were really represented. Lapid, and they do tend to be religious and working class and family values. So Lapid represented them less. Netanyahu can kind of play the game. He was not a general. He was a commando. He was a soldier. Benny Gantz was a general. So
Chief of staff.
I'm sorry?
Chief of staff of the army.
He was chief of staff, but he wasn't, down in the trenches, and Netanyahu was. So Netanyahu can pull off the appeal for the Sephardim. He can pull it off. Benny Gantz, much less so. Yair Lapid, much, much less so.
Right.
So there's that as well. So when you talk about Ben Gvir being racist, it's not racist in the American sense of the word. It's racist against Arab, not racist against black or against something like that. He's racist against Arabs, which is why I think he's gaining an appeal, which is why Netanyahu can join with him and Lapid less so. Lapid has been campaigning with the Arabs. He's been appealing to them.
And sits in the coalition with Bennett alongside them.
Right. When I spoke to Ben Gvir, he actually said, no, I'm sorry. When I spoke to Ben Gvir, he said, they call me an extremist, but they don't call the left-wing extremist. when they're willing to sit with absolute terrorists with blood on their hands. He's like, I talk about, some pretty harsh things, but I don't actually have blood on my hands. I'm seeing this as a pathway to no violence. So the terms are not exactly, he's a racist against Arabs. He's not a racist against blacks. It doesn't translate quite exactly the same way. Okay, I don't want to take up your entire night. You've actually given me an education before I go out and vote. But you didn't tell me who to vote for.
And I will not do so.
Oh man. My wife was going to ask me. I was hoping I could give her your answer and be done with it. Oh well, I guess I'm going to have to go and do some more homework. Okay, Pastor Trey, I hope to talk to you again after the election and see how it comes out. You've said a lot of things that I didn't know. You said a lot of things that surprised me. One of them is that you don't think this will stick. You think there's going to be a sixth election, which
I think it's a distinct possibility because the dynamics haven't changed. This is a pro-BB versus anti-BB election, and the numbers haven't moved much. So I think BB has the best chance to form the coalition. I just don't think it's a guarantee. And if he can't, you're looking at a sixth round.
And even if he forms a coalition of 60 or 61, it can fall tomorrow.
Correct.
If someone steps out of the coalition, which is what's happened. So
correct.
Okay, Pastor Trey, I can't thank you enough. We'll connect again after the election, and we'll see how right you were. You didn't make a prediction, so I can't say you're wrong. Thank you so much, Pastor Trey. Be blessed, and I can't wait to talk to you again.
Thank you, my friend. Bless.